I fell in love with my brother's wife, then he died and left us together. Reddit stories. They say blood is thicker than water, but no one ever explains what happens when love seeps through both and stains everything in between. Before I tell you what I did and what she did, you have to understand the beginning, because this isn't a story about betrayal, not really. It's a story about silence, timing, and how family can be the most dangerous place to fall in love. We were always close. Our family, I mean. Small, tight-knit. The kind that takes the same summer vacation every year and wears matching pajamas on Christmas morning, no matter how old we got. My older brother Daniel was the golden one. Always taller, smarter, cleaner. He did everything first car, first heartbreak, first real job, and eventually first to get married. To her, Julia. Julia came into our lives like she'd always belonged. My parents loved her instantly. My mother said she was elegant but warm. My dad loved how she laughed with her whole face. And me, I noticed her before she noticed me. That first Thanksgiving, she showed up in a beige coat with red lipstick and a bottle of wine she said she wasn't sure was good enough for such a perfect family dinner. I told her it didn't matter. We usually drank root beer floats after the turkey. She laughed, and I knew I was in trouble. But I buried it. That feeling. It wasn't just because she was with Daniel. It was because that kind of thing didn't happen in our family. We didn't cheat. We didn't lie. We didn't feel things we weren't supposed to feel. We sat side by side at Sunday dinners, passed mashed potatoes, and pretended everything was clean. It had to be clean. For the first few years, it wasn't hard. They were happy. You could see it. Julia's eyes always found Daniel's across the room. At family barbecues. She'd rest her hand on his back like it was second nature. And Daniel looked at her like she was something rare and fragile he had been lucky enough to keep. But cracks formed quietly in even the strongest glass. The first time I noticed was during a weekend trip to the lake. Daniel had stayed behind to finish some work, and Julia came early with the rest of us. That night, after the fire died down, we sat out on the dock. Just the two of us. We talked about the stars. She told me about how her parents never really stayed in one place, and that's why she liked our family. Because we were still, safe, predictable. Then she said, "Sometimes I feel like I married into a painting." I asked her what she meant, and she shook her head, smiling. "It's beautiful, but it doesn't move." After that weekend, something was different. I started noticing little things. The way her smile faltered when Daniel spoke over her. The way she looked at me longer than she should when no one was watching. How our conversations started lasting a bit too long in the kitchen while everyone else was in the living room. Still, I told myself it was nothing. A fantasy, a passing thing. It had to be. Then came the day I wish I could forget. My brother got a promotion. Huge one. He threw a party. Loud music, catered food, everyone from the office. Julia looked like a ghost. I found her on the back patio, staring at the garden lights. I told her congratulations. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, "Do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" I didn't know what to say, so I said the wrong thing. I said, "All the time." She looked at me, really looked, and something passed between us that felt like falling off a cliff in perfect silence. I left early that night. I shouldn't have, because that's when the boundary I'd been protecting for years finally cracked. 2 days later, she came to see me. "I needed air," she said. "I needed someone who sees me." I told her it was a mistake. That we couldn't. She nodded, said she understood. Then she kissed me anyway. It didn't go further than that. Not then. But the damage was done. Something that had always been an undercurrent was now undeniable, roaring just beneath the surface of everything we said. Every time we were in the same room. She didn't leave Daniel. She didn't even bring it up. And I didn't tell him. What could I say? That his perfect little brother kissed his perfect wife behind a closed door and wished the moment would last forever. I tried to stay away. I even took a job out of state. moved into a tiny apartment that smelled like old rain and cardboard. But love, or obsession, or whatever it was, clings. I'd wake up with her name in my mouth, dream of her laughter echoing through that summer dock, the way her hair curled when it was humid, the way she once touched my hand like it was made of glass. Years passed. Daniel and Julia stayed married. Had a kid. I was the uncle, the fun one who sent toys in the mail and came to visit on birthdays. Julia and I pretended, hugged like friends, smiled like nothing had ever happened. But every now and then, when we were alone for even a second, her eyes would say what we never did, it's still there. I got married too. To someone kind, safe, a school teacher who loved me more than I ever loved myself. We bought a house with a lemon tree and a fireplace. Had a daughter with my wife's eyes. And for a while, I convinced myself that was the life I was meant to have. That Julia had been a fever dream from another version of me. But life has a strange way of circling back. It waits until you've built something solid and then tests every foundation you thought was unshakable. The call came on a Tuesday. My brother was in the hospital. Stroke. They said it was small, manageable, but his speech was slurred and he couldn't remember the word for envelope. Julia called me crying. I drove through the night to be there, and there she was, older, tired, but still her. She smiled when she saw me, then broke into tears. We stood in the hospital hallway like ghosts, like echoes. I hugged her, and it felt like being buried in the past. "He's going to be okay," I said. "I know," she whispered. "But I'm not." We didn't speak of what we meant. We never did. But that night, after Daniel fell asleep, she came to my hotel. Said she just needed someone to talk to. That she couldn't fall apart in front of their son. I let her in. We sat on the edge of the bed, not touching. She told me things about the years, about how lonely it had become, how Daniel had grown colder, more closed off, how the boy who once looked at her like a sunrise now barely looked at her at all. "I never stopped wondering what would have happened," she said. "I told her we couldn't do this." "Not again," she nodded. Then cried into my shoulder for an hour. She left without kissing me, and that somehow was worse. But here's the thing no one tells you about stories like this. They never really end. They just shift into something else, something quieter, like a low hum under everything. A year later, Daniel died, heart attack. Quick, brutal. I gave the eulogy, held Julia's hand while she trembled, stayed for a month to help with their son. Everyone said I was a hero, a good brother, a strong uncle. And when the dust settled, Julia and I were alone again. That's when it started. But not how you think. We didn't move in together. There was no grand confession, no luggage on the porch, no whispered promise of forever. Instead, there was quiet. The kind that grows between people who've buried too much for too long. I stayed in the guest room, helped get her son to school, cooked breakfast like a brother-in-law should. I wore Daniel's slippers in the morning and watered his plants in the afternoon. I became the man-shaped shadow he left behind. Julia didn't smile much during those first few months. Grief changes people in microscopic ways, things you wouldn't notice unless you were watching closely. She stirred her tea slower, forgot words mid-sentence, walked into rooms and stood still for too long, like the air had been sucked out of them. And yet, she never broke. Not in front of anyone. Not even me. I tried to leave several times, told her it would be better, healthier, if I gave her space. But each time I packed my bag, she said the same thing. Just one more day. And I always gave in, because leaving meant cutting away the only thread left that still bound me to her. To him. To the version of our family that once made sense. One night, after her son had fallen asleep clutching a stuffed bear missing one eye, I found her in the laundry room folding his tiny shirts. The hum of the dryer was the only sound. She looked up and said, "Do you think he knew?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. "No," I said, too quickly. "He didn't." She nodded, kept folding. "Sometimes I think he saw everything. Just didn't want to admit it." The idea haunted me. Daniel, so proud and composed, quietly watching from the edges as something festered between us. Maybe he knew all along. Maybe he was waiting for me to prove I could be better. Maybe I failed him long before I ever kissed her. Spring came late that year. Everything bloomed at once, like the world had held its breath too long and finally exhaled in color. I started sleeping less. The house was too quiet at night. I would sit in the living room staring at old family photos. The four of us at the Grand Canyon, at my college graduation, at Daniel and Julia's wedding. There we were, frozen in time, pretending forever was real. The lines between comfort and something more started to blur. Julia would reach for my hand at the dinner table. I'd tuck her son into bed and kiss his forehead without thinking. We weren't pretending anymore. We were rewriting the script, subtly, carefully, like thieves picking the lock of their own hearts. But even in this quiet bloom of something new, guilt crept in like frost under the door. I started seeing Daniel's face in mirrors, heard his voice in the garage, calling my name. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, certain he was standing at the foot of the bed. I kept wondering what kind of man does this to his own brother. Then came the letter. It arrived on a Wednesday. Yellow envelope, Daniel's handwriting. Julia found it in a box of old receipts. Her hands shook as she handed it to me. I took it outside and read it under the oak tree he planted the year their son was born. It was addressed to me. If you're reading this, I guess I'm gone. Don't worry. This isn't some dramatic confession or blame-fueled guilt trip. It's just something I wanted to say in case life pulled one of its fast ones. I always knew there was something between you two. Not in a bitter way. Just knew. I saw it when you didn't look at her the same way anyone else did. When she laughed harder at your jokes. I didn't say anything because I believed in time. I thought time would fix it, dull it, erase it. Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. But listen, love doesn't always happen the way it should. That doesn't make it less real. If you end up with her, if that's where life leads, you owe me only one thing: protect them. Both of them. Fiercely. No secrets. No lies. Just love, all the way through. Daniel. I sat there for an hour rereading it until the ink blurred with tears. I hated him for being kind. For seeing everything and saying nothing. For giving me permission when I deserved punishment. That night, I told Julia. She cried silently, head resting on my shoulder, her tears soaking into my shirt. We didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Everything we were afraid of had already been seen, forgiven, set free. It should have been easier after that, but love that grows in the dark doesn't always survive the light. We tried to make it work. I moved in. We cleared out the guest room and turned it into an office. Took weekend trips, made pancakes on Sundays. But Daniel's ghost was everywhere, in the way his son laughed. In the toolbox I still used. In the bed where Julia sometimes still rolled to the left before realizing no one was there. We didn't scream. We just started speaking less. One day, I found her sitting alone in the garden, staring at the oak tree. "Do you ever feel like we stole something?" she asked. I didn't answer. Because yes, I did. Every single day. But love isn't always clean. Sometimes it's jagged, limping, held together by shared silence. We loved each other, but it was the kind of love that came too late, burdened by what it took to get there. The breaking point came quietly on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Her son had a school play. He asked me not to come. "What?" I asked, kneeling to meet his eyes. He shrugged. "I just wanted to be mom this time." Julia didn't say anything, just rested her hand on his head, her face unreadable. That night, we sat on opposite sides of the couch. She whispered, "I think it's time." I knew what she meant. I nodded. I moved out 2 weeks later. Left behind the slippers, the garden gloves, the half-used bottle of cologne on the bathroom shelf. I took only what was mine, and even that felt like stealing. We didn't stop talking completely. Birthdays, holidays, the occasional email. Her son sent me drawings. She sent thank yous. The love didn't die. It just shrunk into a box too small to open again. Years passed. I moved again, this time to a smaller city. Took a job as a librarian. Found peace in quiet aisles and worn-out pages. Stopped checking her social media. Stopped asking mutual friends how she was. Let the silence finally settle. Until one morning, a letter arrived, same handwriting, same yellow envelope. Julia. Oh, I don't know why I'm writing. Maybe because you were always the one I told the truth to, even when I didn't say it out loud. I got remarried last fall. He's kind, steady, loves my son like his own. We're happy in a quiet, different way. I hope you are too. I just wanted to say thank you for loving me when I needed it, for letting me go when I didn't know how. I'll always carry that version of us in a secret part of me, like a pressed flower in a forgotten book. It meant more than I ever said. Jay, I read it 3 times, then burned it, because some loves are meant to end in ashes, and yet I still see her sometimes. In dreams, in strangers on the street, in the half-formed smile of someone walking alone. I wonder if she ever looks for me in crowded rooms. If she ever wonders what it could have been if we had met in a different life, under a different sky, without my brother in between. But that's not our story. Ours was never meant to be clean. And that, I've learned, is a kind of love too. They say time heals everything, but that's a lie people tell to survive. Time doesn't heal. It only rearranges the wreckage so it looks a little prettier. And some wreckage, no matter how carefully tucked away, still glints through the cracks when the light hits just right. After Julia's letter, I didn't date for a long while. I tried, sure. A few dinners. A coffee date with a nurse who smiled too much. A bookstore meet up with a poet who talked only in metaphors. But every time I looked into someone's eyes, I saw the shadow of another pair. Green, tired, familiar. I wasn't haunted by Julia. I was haunted by the version of myself that existed when I was with her. And worse, the version of her that only existed with me. Loneliness became a companion I didn't resent. It didn't ask questions. It didn't expect apologies. I built a quiet life, a rhythm. Mornings started with black coffee and silence. Evenings ended with audiobooks and a single glass of red wine. I took up walking, not jogging, just walking, around the lake near my apartment. Same path, same time, every day. I knew which ducks were always there, which trees lost their leaves first. I became a man of predictable patterns. A man who never let the past touch the present. But the past, as I learned again, doesn't ask permission. It was late October when I saw him. Small frame, messy brown hair, backpack slung too low. He was sitting on a park bench with a Game Boy clutched in his hands like a relic. I wouldn't have thought anything of it. Just another kid avoiding homework. If he hadn't looked up at me with Daniel's eyes. I froze. He didn't recognize me at first, of course. It had been 6 years. But when I said his name, softly, carefully, his eyes widened like someone had pressed rewind on his memory. Uncle. My heart almost stopped. He stood unsure, then ran to me, and I hugged him with the kind of H you don't realize you've been carrying until it spills. He was 11 now. Taller, warier. Still had that gentle way of speaking, like every sentence was a secret. He told me he and Julia had moved back temporarily, just for the school year, while her new husband was on assignment overseas. They were staying in the old house, Daniel's house. Mom says she's going to sell it soon, he said. But I don't think she wants to. Neither did I. I walked him home that evening, and the house looked the same. The porch light flickered, just like it used to. The mailbox still had the same dent on the side from the time Daniel backed into it with his truck. When Julia opened the door, she didn't smile. She didn't speak. She just stared at me like I was a ghost she hadn't planned to see again. I didn't know, I said. I didn't think you'd want to, she replied. The silence between us was heavier than the wind that night. I stayed for 10 minutes, long enough to ask polite questions, compliment the wallpaper she'd finally changed, accept a glass of water I didn't drink. We didn't talk about the letter, or the years, or the quiet war we both surrendered to long ago. Her son, Daniel's son, kept asking if I'd come back the next day. I told him I'd try, and I did, not for her, for him. We started meeting after school, sometimes at the park, sometimes at the diner on 4th Street, where the pancakes were the size of your head. He told me about his new stepdad, about how he was nice but kind of boring, about how he missed his dad more in the fall, about how sometimes he still dreamed about that summer trip to the lake when he caught his first fish and Daniel cried more than he did. I told him stories, clean ones, about his father's terrible taste in music, his obsession with mustard, the time he got stuck in the attic and blamed it on a raccoon. The boy laughed like Julia used to, loud, unfiltered, beautiful, and slowly the past stopped stinging. Until the night Julia asked me to stay for dinner, I hesitated. She noticed. "It's just dinner," she said quietly, but we both knew that wasn't true. The table was smaller now, fewer chairs, fewer photos on the wall. The house felt emptier, but warmer somehow. I sat across from her and realized we were older in a way that couldn't be measured in years. She looked tired, not physically, soul tired, like she had carried too much of a future she hadn't asked for. After the boy went to bed, we sat outside. Same porch swing, same chill in the air. "You've been good with him," she said. "I've missed him." She nodded. "He still calls you uncle, even when you weren't there?" I didn't know what to say, so I asked the question that had been coiled in my throat since the letter. "Why did you write to me?" She looked out at the street. "Because I didn't want to feel like a villain." "You never were." "No," she said. "But I was never the hero either." But we sat in silence for a while. Then she reached into her coat pocket and handed me something. A key. Familiar. Brass. A little scratched. I turned it over in my palm like it might bite. "To what?" I asked. "The attic," she said. "There's something there you should see." I waited until she went to bed. Then I climbed the stairs like I was walking into a memory. The attic smelled the same. Dust, wood, a hint of old perfume. I pulled the chain for the light, and there it was, a box, labeled with my name. Inside are letters, dozens, maybe more, all addressed to me, all unopened. I sat on the floor and read them one by one. They were from Daniel, letters he'd written over the years, some dated before he died, some after Julia and I had kissed, some he never mailed, some he clearly never meant to, but he wrote them anyway. Each one was a glimpse into his mind, his fear, his hope, his pain, and most haunting of all, his love. One letter read, "You think I didn't notice the way she looks at you? I did. I see everything. I always have. But I also see the way you avoid her. The way you protect me from what you feel. You're better than you think. I just wish you'd let yourself believe that." Another, written months before his death. "If I go first, and I probably will, considering the stress this job gives me, I hope you'll take care of them. You always did, even when you weren't supposed to. I forgive you. I forgive her. Don't waste your life punishing yourself. Just love." That's all any of us are trying to do. I don't remember falling asleep in the attic, but I woke up hours later with the box still open and the sun bleeding through the cracks in the roof. And something changed inside me. Guilt doesn't disappear, but sometimes it loosens its grip. Over the next few weeks, I visited more, spent time with the boy, helped fix the leaky faucet Julia kept ignoring. We didn't talk about us. We didn't need to. There was something sacred in the quiet now. A shared understanding that whatever we'd been wasn't meant to be repeated. One morning, she handed me a sealed envelope. "For when you're ready," she said. I waited until I got home. Inside was a single photo: Daniel, Julia, me, the three of us on the dock one summer. Sunlight in our eyes, laughter caught mid-breath. Written on the back, in her handwriting, "Some things don't fade. They just change shape." I placed the photo in a frame, set it on my bookshelf, not in front, not tucked away either. Just there, where it belonged. And I knew then this wasn't a story about forbidden love, or betrayal, or ghosts. It was a story about love in all its forms. The messy, the inconvenient, the enduring. Even the kind you have to walk away from to understand. The leaves began to fall again. That time of year when everything beautiful seems to die slowly, fluttering to the ground with a kind of reluctant grace. Autumn always made me think of Daniel, maybe because he died in the fall, or maybe because he had the kind of warmth that made even the coldest days feel bearable. Either way, every gust of wind felt like a reminder, like the world itself was exhaling his name without making a sound. I kept seeing the boy, Daniel's son, Julia's boy, the only piece of them that felt untouched by the mess we'd made. He started calling me more often, texting me things like, "Uncle, check out this game," or "Got a B-fuzz in science." I told him I was proud. Always. I meant it. He didn't know the weight he carried in my heart. He was the only part of the story that had remained untainted. And I swore to myself I'd keep it that way. Julia didn't speak much after giving me the photo. We stayed in each other's orbits but never collided. Her voice softened around me, as if we were porcelain now. Fragile, precious, breakable. There were moments, though. Tiny flashes. When I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. In those moments, the past didn't feel so distant, but we both knew better than to touch it. One Saturday afternoon, the boy asked me something I wasn't ready for. "Uncle," he said, "do you ever wish things were different?" We were sitting by the lake again. The same lake where everything started. He had just skipped a rock so perfectly it bounced 4 times. I didn't answer right away. How could I? "Yeah," I finally said. "Sometimes. But then I think, if things were different, maybe we wouldn't be sitting here." He nodded like he understood. I think he did, in his own way. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the versions of life I had never lived. The one where I never kissed Julia. The one where I told Daniel the truth. The one where I disappeared completely, let them be happy, never looked back. But no version ever felt quite real. Because this mess, this imperfect, tangled, bleeding story, was the only one that actually happened. I started going through the letters again. Daniel's words had taken on a new texture with time. Some parts stung less, some more. One in particular stood out, a line I had read but never truly heard until now. "You have to live a life that can't be taken from you. Not by me. Not by anyone." I kept repeating that sentence in my head, over and over, like a mantra, like a dare. A few days later, I got a call from Julia. Short. Simple. "He asked if you could come to the parent-teacher conference. He wants you there." I hesitated, but only for a second. At the school, we sat side by side in those 2 small chairs meant for children, pretending we were just 2 adults co-parenting a bright, curious boy. The teacher said he was doing well, polite, thoughtful, sometimes too quiet. I smiled. That was Daniel all over again. When it was over, Julia and I walked to our cars in silence. Then she said, "I think you should know. I'm selling the house next month. For real this time." I looked at her surprised. "Where will you go?" "I don't know," she said. "Somewhere new. Somewhere that doesn't feel like a memory every time I open a drawer." I understood. Completely. That evening, I visited the house one last time. She let me walk through it alone, room by room. The scent of old wood and lavender lingered in the air. The living room still had the same indent in the couch cushion where Daniel used to sit. The kitchen window still squeaked when you opened it. I found myself pausing in the hallway, where a row of pencil marks still measured the boy's height over the years. One mark was labeled, "First day of school." An oak arm. Another, "Dad's last hug." I ran my fingers over that one for a long time. In the attic, the box was gone. So were the letters. I didn't ask where they were. I didn't need to. They had served their purpose. Before I left, Julia stood on the porch and handed me a bag. "He wanted you to have this," she said. Inside a Daniel's old jacket. Faded, soft, frayed at the cuffs. I slipped it on without a word. It still smelled like pine and something I couldn't name. Memory. Maybe we didn't say goodbye. We just nodded like people who understood each other in a way words would only cheapen. And then I was gone. Months passed. Winter arrived with its cruel honesty. Everything bare, stripped down, cold. But I didn't mind. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. I started writing again. Nothing fancy. Just thoughts. Memories. Letters I never sent. It felt like bleeding in a controlled way, like giving pain a place to live so it wouldn't rot somewhere inside me. One day, I got a letter in return. It wasn't from Julia. It was from the boy. Short. A little messy, but every word hit like a drum. Dear Uncle, I just wanted to say thank you for being there, for showing up, for telling me stories about my dad. I miss him, but when I'm with you, I don't miss him as much. I think he'd be happy if he knew you were still around. I hope we can see each other again soon. I don't know what it's called when someone isn't your dad but kind of is. But I think that's you. Love. Me, I cried for an hour. Not the kind of cry you do in front of people. The kind that folds you in half, leaves your chest hollow and your throat raw. I had spent so many years asking myself if I was the villain, if I deserved anything good after what I had done. And here was this boy, this beautiful, honest boy, handing me grace like it was nothing. That letter stayed on my fridge for a long time. Still there now. Sometime later, I got an email. Julia, just a line, next week. School play. He wants you there. I booked the ticket without hesitation. When I walked into the auditorium, the lights were already dimming. The play was about stars, or maybe time. Honestly, I barely heard the words. I just watched him. On stage, smiling, confident, alive. A boy who had been touched by so much loss and still knew how to shine. Afterward, he ran up and hugged me like he never wanted to let go. And Julia. Well, she stood behind him, hands folded. Watching, we locked eyes for a moment. No smiles, no words. Just understanding. We were never meant to be forever, but we were meant to be something. I stayed for the weekend, slept on the couch, made waffles, laughed at his jokes, watched him roll his eyes when we asked him to clean up. And for a moment, just a sliver of time, I felt like I had a family again. Not the one I started with, not the one I broke, but the one that found me anyway. They say some stories never really end. They just shift into quieter chapters. That weekend at Julia's new house was one of those chapters. The walls were different, the street unfamiliar, but the rhythm was the same, her son laughing from the hallway. The smell of burnt toast in the kitchen, the soft murmur of a home that wasn't mine, but somehow always let me in. It was Sunday morning when he asked if I could help him with a school project, a family tree. The kind of assignment that seems innocent until it isn't. We sat at the kitchen table with crayons, glue, and a flimsy piece of paper shaped like an oak. He had already filled in most of it. Grandparents, cousins, even a goldfish named Rocket, who apparently counted as family. But when he reached the branch labeled Father, his hand hesitated. He looked up at me and said, "Can I put you here?" My throat closed. I stared at that small space like it was a wound I couldn't touch. Julia was at the sink. Her hands stopped moving, but she didn't turn around. She waited. "I'm not your father," I said gently. "That was Daniel. That was your dad." "I know," he replied, "but he's gone. And you're here. That has to count for something, right?" It did. It counted for everything. But the truth wasn't a neat puzzle piece I could hand him. I looked at Julia. She finally turned, eyes soft but tired. She didn't say no. She didn't say anything. "Tell you what," I said, reaching for another branch. "Why don't we make a new one? Just for the people you choose. Your family, not just the one you were born into." He grinned, pulled out a marker, and started sketching. At the top, he wrote in capital letters, "M.Y. Royale Family." And there I was, right beside him, not replacing Daniel, just beside him. And that was enough. Later that afternoon, Julia and I sat on the porch. The boy was inside watching cartoons. The air smelled like oranges and rain. She handed me a cup of tea without a word. We sat in the silence we knew so well. "He loves you," she said finally. "In a way he never says, but it's always there." "I love him too," I said. "And I never wanted it to be this way. I never planned for any of it." "I know," she whispered. There was a pause, long and heavy and familiar. Then she said, Sometimes I wonder what Daniel would think if he saw us now. I looked out at the sky. I think he does. That night, after Julia had gone to bed, I sat alone in the guest room. Her son had fallen asleep with his arms around a pillow shaped like a dinosaur. The quiet crept in, wrapped around me like a slow fog. I looked at the framed photo on the nightstand. Daniel holding his son, both of them laughing, alive in a way that memory could never quite replicate. I pulled out my notebook and wrote, "Dear Daniel, he's good. You would have been proud. He's curious, kind, thoughtful. He asks big questions and laughs like he's never been hurt. Julia's doing her best. She still folds towels the way you liked and burns toast the same way. I visit when I can. I try not to take up too much space, but he keeps pulling me in. I don't know what that makes me. A placeholder, a shadow, something in between. I wish you'd told me more. I wish I had listened harder. I'm sorry we never got to talk about it. Really talk. But if you see us, if you're still watching, I hope you know I kept my promise. I'm protecting them every day. With everything I have." I closed the notebook and stared at the ceiling until sleep finally took me. In the months that followed, life found its rhythm again. Julia and I didn't define what we were anymore. We didn't try to. There was no label that made sense. Too much past, too much weight. But we coexisted in that quiet in-between, the space between love and responsibility, between memory and moving on. The boy, he was growing fast. He started calling me just to tell me things. That he asked a test. That he built a robot in class. That he missed me. Sometimes I'd drive down just for a weekend. Sometimes I'd stay for a week. Sometimes I'd leave before breakfast just to avoid whatever conversation Julia and I weren't ready to have. Then came the summer trip. Every year, Daniel had taken him to the mountains, a cabin by a lake, fishing, hiking, stories by the fire. It was a tradition. And this year, he asked if I'd go with him. Mom says I'm old enough now, that we can go without her. She agreed, on one condition: I take his father's journal, a worn leather-bound notebook Daniel had written in every summer. She had never read it, said it felt like it wasn't hers to open. So I packed the journal, and we drove north. The cabin was exactly how I remembered it. Pine trees stretching into the sky, the dock creaking like an old man's knees. The same chipped coffee mug in the cupboard, everything frozen in time, like Daniel had just stepped out for firewood. The boy ran through the trees like he'd been born there. I sat on the porch, flipping through the journal. Daniel's handwriting, neat and familiar. Pages filled with observations. Birds he'd seen, fish he'd caught, things his son had said. Then, tucked between two pages near the end, I found something different. A letter. Folded. Sealed. My name on the front. My hands trembled as I opened it. If you're reading this, it means the tradition lives on. That he's back at the lake. That someone brought him here with love. I don't know who you are now. Maybe you're still the brother who always beat me at cards. Maybe you're something else. But if you've kept this, if you've brought him here, then thank you. Tell him I loved him more than life. Tell him I'd give anything for one more day. Tell him to never stop asking questions. And tell Julia, no, don't tell her anything. Just make sure she's okay. That's enough. I folded the letter back up, placed it in my pocket, and stared at the lake for a long time. That night, we lit a fire, roasted marshmallows, told stories. He asked me about my favorite memory of his dad. I told him about the time Daniel taught me to ride a bike, how he let go too soon and I crashed into a mailbox, but still called it a win. The boy laughed so hard he snorted. It was perfect. Before bed, I handed him the journal. "This was your dad's?" I said. "He wrote in it every year when he brought you here. I think it's your turn now." He took it carefully, like it was made of glass. His eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. Then he looked up at me and asked, "Did he ever write about you?" I smiled. "Yeah, once or twice." He nodded, hugged the journal to his chest, and went inside. I sat by the fire for a long time, let the flames eat away at the silence. And when the last ember died, I whispered, He loved you more than I ever could, but I'll love you as much as I can, for as long as I'm here." The next morning, the boy showed me a new page in the journal. It read, "A first trip without Dad. Still felt like he was here. Uncle says we carry people in memories, but I think they're just hiding in the trees." I didn't cry. Not then, but later. When he wasn't looking, I walked into the woods and let myself break. Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is admit that love doesn't always end. It just changes form. And some promises don't die with the person who made them. They live in journals and summer fires, and in the laughter of a boy who still believes his father is hiding somewhere in the trees. I used to think the end of a story had to be loud, something final, some great door slamming shut behind you. But real endings don't work like that. They don't come with fireworks or final words. They come like fog, gradually, softly, and by the time you realize they've arrived, they've already been there a while. The boy's journal entry stayed with me. "I think they're just hiding in the trees." It was the kind of thing only a child could believe without flinching. And yet, standing in that forest, the branches whispering with wind and memory, I believed it too. We left the cabin 2 days later, but something about me stayed behind. Some part that no longer needed to be dragged through guilt or buried under what-ifs. That trip gave me permission. Not from Julia, not from Daniel, but from myself. Permission to stop being the ghost of my own life. Back home, I fell into a routine. I started volunteering at the local youth center, fixing bikes and teaching kids how to change their own tires. The boy came to visit once a month. Julia and I kept our distance, but not out of bitterness. Out of respect. We had reached the kind of understanding that doesn't need to be spoken. A truce made of time. One Sunday afternoon, years later, I got a call. It was him, but his voice had changed. Deeper now. "Confidential," he said. "I got into college." I didn't speak at first, just smiled so wide it hurt. "I'm proud of you," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's why I called." He told me he wanted to study literature, that he'd been writing stories, that he wasn't sure what kind yet, but that it felt right. I asked him if he was still keeping the journal. He said yes, and then added, "There's a lot about you in it now." That night, I dug through my drawer and found the letter Daniel had left at the cabin. I hadn't read it in years, but I opened it again. And this time, I noticed something I'd missed before. A small line written in the corner, barely visible. "If he grows up to be anything like you, I'll rest easy." I didn't cry, not right away. But later, as the moon cast shadows across the floor and the room felt too quiet, I let the weight of it all wash over me. I had lived so long fearing that I had failed my brother, that I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But time has a way of redrawing the map, of showing you the path that mattered wasn't the one you walked perfectly, but the one you never gave up on. And I hadn't given up. Not on Julia, not on the boy, not even on myself. Years passed. Gray crept into my hair. My hands grew slower, but the letters never stopped. He wrote me from college, from his first apartment, from the bookstore where he got his first job. Each one like a lifeline, proof that I had mattered, that I still did. And then, one winter, a letter came with a photograph, him standing under an oak tree. Not just any tree, that tree, the one Daniel had planted, the one I had stood under after reading that first letter. Only now, it was huge, towering, strong. On the back of the photo, he'd written, "Planted by a father, watered by a brother, watched over by both." I sat with that photo for hours, traced the lines of the tree, the slope of his shoulders, the smile that looked so much like Daniel's it made my chest ache. And that's when I knew this was the ending. Not a door slamming shut, but a light turning off slowly, leaving behind only the glow, the warmth, the shape of everything that had ever mattered. I never married again. I never had more children. But I had him. And somehow that was enough. Julia and I grew old separately. She moved to a quieter town. We'd send cards on holidays. Sometimes talk on the phone. Never for long. but long enough to know we were still here, still breathing, still tied by the thread of a story we could never fully unravel. On my 70th birthday, there was a knock at the door. It was him, older now, taller than me, a little stubble on his chin, but those same eyes, those same eyes. "Hey, old man," he said, smiling. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" We spent the day going through old boxes, photos, letters, drawings he'd made when he was 6. We laughed, we cried, we remembered. That night, as he poured us both a glass of wine, he handed me something, a book. His book, on the cover, Branches, a Memoir. By him. Dedicated to my father who planted the seed, and to the man who helped me grow. I didn't even try to hide the tears that time, because in that moment I saw it all. Every choice, every mistake, every silent sacrifice, woven into something beautiful, not perfect, but real. He had turned our story into something that would outlive both of us, and that, I realized, was the only redemption that ever mattered. The next morning, as he packed to leave, he hugged me a little longer than usual. "I'll be back soon," he said. "You always say that." And I always mean it, Pot. I watched his car disappear down the street. Then I walked to the backyard, where a new sapling had started to grow near the old oak. I hadn't planted it. Maybe a bird had dropped it. Or maybe it was just time. I sat beside it, letting the sun warm my face. And I thought of Daniel, of Julia, of the boy who had become a man, of the family we had been, the family we had become. Not one built perfectly, but one built piece by piece out of truth and pain and forgiveness. And love. Always love. In the end, I didn't get the story I thought I wanted. But I got the story that mattered. And maybe that was the point all along. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe and like the video.